The parents weren't having sex. The father withdrew from the family and would drink. And the mother had no support and kind of over-attached to the son. And the son, by becoming depressed and self-sabotaging, was actually keeping himself home so that his mother would be okay, because on some level he knew that he was her only support. And so you needed to get the parents together to free up the son so that he could actually mature. But the family was framing it as, what's wrong with the son? When it's really this larger constellation of this family drama of the different roles and aggression and needs and guilt.
Welcome to the Open Therapy Podcast with writer, commentator, and social psychologist Rob Henderson and psychologist Andrew Hartz, founder of the Open Therapy Institute. I am your moderator and lady in the middle, Megan Daum. Gentlemen, what are we here to talk about today? What's on your minds? What are we doing here at all? What are we doing here at all?
On Earth?
You're starting very analytically, Megan, whether you know it or not. You just leave it open, whatever we feel, we want to talk about today.
So we're gonna, this is our second episode of this podcast. Very exciting. And we're here to talk about psychology in everyday life. Something like that. How it applies to the normal person. Or actually, is this just for people who are special?
No. It's for people who aren't special at all.
Okay, that's why you hired me. So that's why we're here. Okay.
Well, I had said we ended last time saying if you wanted to go deep and really understand psychoanalysis, what are the books that you'd want to read to really understand this? And the way I've been kind of thinking about these conversations is it's almost like you're listening in on a graduate seminar. A lot of readings that I'm thinking about that we've talked about are things that taken directly from my class that I used to teach in a PhD program, and it was mostly about psychoanalysis. And so it's why don't we take the best that it has to offer and just kind of go slowly through it and unpack what's there. I mean, there's a lot that's really dated about it. There's a lot that has fallen by the wayside about it, but there's still a lot that's really interesting about the psychoanalytic approach. And so the first thing I wanted to suggest that we start with, which was the first book that I read about psychoanalysis, actually.
First book ever in your life?
Thing I ever read. It was before grad school, and it was this was the book that made me want to go to a psychoanalytic program and become a therapist. It was this.
Those are fighting words. So people, beware, everybody out there, before you read this book.
It's called Freud and Man's Soul by Bruno Bettelheim. And, just disclaimer, Bruno Bettelheim is a reviled figure and widely hated. And it mostly because he's credited with popularizing the idea that autism was caused by bad mothering.
Is he the refrigerator mom guy?
Yeah, basically. I don't know if he originated the idea or
it doesn't sound like him,
popular, but it was never really based on evidence. It was always kind of based on psychoanalytic theory, and it really ruined a lot of people's lives. And so, just thinking about all of these moms who were struggling with an autistic kid and wanted help and got falsely and pointlessly blamed. And that's really a big reason why he has so many enemies. He's not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. I can't remember what his background was or if he even has an advanced degree in anything. But it's really clear that he is a brilliant writer, and he grew up in Vienna at the time of Freud and just has a fascinating take on psychoanalysis, which is why this book is so good. He has another really great book called The Uses of Enchantment that's about fairy tales. That's also highly recommend. And he's just a great writer with really insightful ideas. And this book, really short book, is yes, small, small, small. And it's like, it's just full of really thoughtful takes about Freud that I felt like opened up his work in a way that made it interesting and useful feeling, as opposed to a lot of the times I encountered it and it was like esoteric and weird and difficult.
Right. And we should say that Bettelheim, he lived from 1903 to 1990. So I highly doubt he coined the phrase refrigerator mom, but I think it's interesting that he was talking about autism, during this period. I mean, presumably it was probably like the 60s or 60s and 70s. Um, I don't even know how autism was being defined at that time. But that's interesting.
It would have been, yeah, before the DSM.
Right.
It was a different world in terms of clinical practice, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's shoes. But
He was also accused by students and colleagues of abusive behavior, authoritarianism, and exaggerating his credentials. And he died by suicide in 1990.
Suicide at age 77?
Yeah.
76?
Yeah, after
All
illness or
right.
professional decline. That's what it says. So,
Okay.
okay.
Well,
okay,
I wonder, yeah, the cause of death there specifically, what he did. I mean, what do you do at 77 to off yourself?
Come on. You
Yeah.
can't, that's ageist of you, Rob.
No, you're right. 77, you're still in the prime of your life. You're right. That's middle age practically.
No, I mean, you say a 77-year-old can commit suicide just as readily as anybody. So don't.
No,
So
I'm wondering, like, did he die on a motorcycle accident? Was he skydiving? You know, like, what was he?
That is actually.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Okay. Well, it occurred to me, Andrew, as you were describing Bruno Bettelheim, I think a lot of that description could characterize Freud himself. You know, this person who had these amazing ideas, beautiful writer, but many of those claims that he made did end up negatively affecting a lot of people. The crazier ideas that he came up with probably harmed a lot of patients or readers or people familiar with his ideas, or maybe kind of bastardized version of those ideas. And it's funny, like in the book, Bettelheim opens by drawing comparisons between himself and Freud about how they were kind of in the same milieu in Vienna, Jewish intellectuals who were interested in the psyche and the soul. And then Bettelheim later, because you'd mentioned his credentials or lack thereof. Bettelheim riffs a little on Freud's, was it an essay, The Question of Lay Analysis, of whether non-physicians should be allowed to practice psychoanalysis with patients. He spent a good deal of time sort of dwelling on that point. I couldn't help but wonder, it was Bettelheim kind of defending himself because he was not a physician, but he clearly is interested in psychoanalysis as a practitioner. So yeah, it was. I got about halfway through the book, and so far it's beautifully written, as you said, Andrew. It's very well done. Yeah, helped me to, I think, understand the influence more of Freud. If you view him, which I kind of did, like I think I mentioned in the previous discussion we had that Freud is, if you hear about him at all in academic psychology programs, you might get, kind of half a lecture, an intro psych about him, and then he's never spoken of again. But if you view him as a scientist, he clearly falls short. But if you view him as a humanist or someone who is trying to understand the human condition, then there's a great deal more credit I think you could give him.
there's something really, actually, it's interesting you talk about science. That's a big part of the book is how Freud is translated into English and why he's translated into English the way he is. And one of the words that probably has a big impact here is science, which in German is Wissenschaft. It's like, it's a little different connotation in German than in English, where English science kind of, we think about biology, we think about chemistry, we think about labs and experiments, and Wissenschaft is broader in terms of any kind of rigorous interrogation of a phenomena, and it doesn't quite have the doesn't have to be in a lab in the same kind of narrow way. And a lot of academic disciplines originated in Germany, like religious studies, and like a rigorous analysis of a lot of things emerged from this idea of Wissenschaft, that it's like a science as a rigorous systematic inquiry into something, as opposed to necessarily like labs and experiments and white coats and that sort of thing that we tend to think of. So it that kind of illustrates how even inaccurate translation into English kind of changes things when Freud wants to talk about a science of psychoanalysis versus what we would think of as a science.
Yeah,
Just
I see.
sorry, just really quickly, point of correction. Bettelheim was actually 86 when he died. So
Oh, so definitely it was a motorcycle.
math was yeah. He had Parkinson's, and it's like he died by asphyxiation. So it was kind of that was sort of the Kevorkian era, right? So anyway, just point of correction, 86. Yeah.
What a life. I don't mean to sidetrack, but to be born in 1903 and then die in you said 1990?
1990.
Okay, so when he was born, I think the Wright brothers had either just had their first flight or maybe never had, not yet. And then when he died, we'd been to the moon so many times we got bored of it and stopped going. So, that's an incredible run. So yeah, on page 41 here on the Wissenschaften point, so Bettelheim talks about there are kind of two disciplines under the umbrella of Wissenschaften, which I guess in German translates just to science, but then he talks about Naturwissenschaften, so the natural sciences, which I guess would be like physics and chemistry and biology, and then Geisteswissenschaften, which defies translation into English. Its literal meaning is sciences of the spirit. It's funny because I read that and I thought, okay, well, why not just call it social science or call it humanities? But it's something else entirely. It can't easily be translated into English. And this is kind of, I guess, like what does he describe it as? Well, we talked about ideographic and nomothetic before. So this is like trying to understand something from a unique perspective, from the perspective of, I guess, that person, that human being, rather than try to come up with some general laws about how, how human beings are supposed to work under like a natural sciences framework. And so, yeah, I think that is helpful for me. Like a lot of this book seems to be about like mistranslations of Freud. One thing that actually helped me, where was this? It was like everyone talks about like the Freudian slip, right? Like you accidentally say something. I remember hearing this joke, Andrew, you may have heard of it, Megan, you too, about something like a Freudian slip is when you say one thing and mean your mother. And in this book, he talks about how you could say parapraxis. So parapraxis is the formal term for Freudian slip. But the actual German phrase could better, at least according to Bettelheim, could better be translated into faulty achievement, which actually I think is more. So parapraxis means nothing to a normal person. You hear that phrase and you're like, what is that? Freudian slip, I think, helps you maybe understand it a bit better. But faulty achievement, I think, really captures this idea of like there are kind of two parts of yourself that are at war, and the part that you don't want to acknowledge has accidentally achieved something. Andrew, I'm curious, like, am I describing that correctly?
Yeah. There's a number of different types of slips, and if you look at like psychopathology of everyday life, like a lot of chapters are different kinds of slips that people can make, and one of them is this kind of faulty achievement. The parapraxis thing, a lot of concepts in the English translation use these Latinized jargon terms like cathexis and parapraxis and things like this that Freud never used. These were invented for the English translation. And so when somebody reads it in English, they're immediately confused by all of these terms that have complicated definitions and they can't figure out what's going on. And that's, I don't speak German, but apparently that's not true in the German. I did have a native German speaking student in one of my classes when we read this book, and she felt that it was true, that Freud in German was much more readable and accessible than in English. But that's kind of, I think that's probably like a central claim of the book, really, is that.
It's interesting that people that your student would say this, because my understanding is that Freud, even in English translation, as inaccurate as it might be, Freud, even in English, is considered to be like a good writer, right?
Totally.
Like a good stylist, prose stylist. And no, I've the bit I've read of Freud, like I found it to be surprisingly readable, considering it was a century ago, and old writing is often a slog to get through. But with Freud, I found it like the kind of the translated phrases, the psychoanalytic jargon is hard to track, with cathexis and parapraxis and that kind of thing. But as far as like when he just tries to give examples or explain the ideas, I'm able to understand what he's saying, which is more than can be said for like a lot of like modern academic texts. So, yeah, it's So I think and then this book itself is also very easy to follow, and I wonder if yeah, the reputation of psychoanalysis would be different if more people could comprehend what they're actually saying.
I'm wondering what you guys think about this this relationship between the concept of psyche and the concept of soul, because this one of the things that Bettelheim gets at is that he makes the argument that when Freud talked about psyche, he really meant the soul, and to our ear in the US and in English, soul has this kind of woo-woo valence, and psyche seems more serious and sort of more academic and clinical. Do you think that that Freud would have a kind of different he would cast a kind of different sort of shadow if people associated him with souls more than psyches?
I mean, he probably would be even less respected.
Even less respected. I mean, he is right. He wouldn't be. Yeah, it would be. But isn't like Jung more sort of like soul? Like I don't know if Jung talked about
one of the things that's really interesting. I'm trying to remember of specific examples, but like psyche was often translated into English as mind. And
Right.
there's something about the mind that really makes people think about conscious verbal cognition. Your mind does math, it memorizes note cards, it kind of does stuff like that, as opposed to the soul, which is so much more like immediate in terms of an experience of like, oh, the soul like feels and struggles.
Well, it's the feelings over the facts. The mind is
Yeah.
the facts, and the soul is the feelings.
It's
Right.
much more fuzzy and like I think kind of unnerving in a way, because it's not as rational, and it hits parts of ourselves that aren't as uh factual.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if soul has the same connotation in German as in English. Because if Freud readily and regularly referred to the soul, that's interesting, because Freud was famously a critic of religion, right? He wrote A Future of an Illusion. Religious belief would eventually, I think, fade away as we became more rational. And yet he still would talk about the soul. So I wonder, yeah, if soul just has a different connotation, not like this, yeah, the religious woo-woo metaphysical stuff, but just, yeah, like maybe, yeah, there's no direct equivalent translation in English, but I think psyche actually, if you compare the psyche to mind, psyche has a different feeling, I think. It feels richer than just mind, as you describe, Andrew.
Oh, yeah.
Just like your cognition and your consciousness and your thoughts, but psyche seems to contain that and then some, your emotions and your feelings and phenomenological experiences.
I think if I'm remembering, there is a passage in the Bettelheim that mentions where Freud actually uses the German word for soul, which I think is sealed or some bad.
Seal, yeah.
He uses that word, and it's translated into English as mind. Like that, there's just some kind of like totally, in his mind, like totally unforgivable translations. I would say, I think this is an important caveat that Bettelheim doesn't mention that's important in thinking about this, though. Freud was fluent in English. He wrote letters in English, and he only did psychoanalysis with patients in two languages, German and English. Even though
Oh
he
wow.
spoke French, he didn't have any French analysons. And he did so he was very, and he died in London, at when he fled Hitler, he went to London. That's where he died. So he was fluent in English. He supervised the entire translation. Bettelheim kind of almost presents it as like Freud was not interested in the English translation or something. But in Peter Gay's biography of Freud, you really get the opposite picture, that he was personally overseeing every English translation and confirming it. And they were all translated in his lifetime. And so it changes it a little bit in the sense that Freud must have been just interested in technical accuracy or even respectability that he was trying to get in the English speaking world over, capturing his style or his connotations in German. But he was definitely involved in the English translation and fluent in English, which I think maybe makes the mistranslations like more confusing or something.
That's what I was wondering, is if he or his translators intentionally used these mystifying terms, these unfamiliar terms, in order to enhance the perceived respectability of the discipline. Because if you're a scientist and you use the word soul, people will just dismiss you. But if you say mind or these other phrases, cathexis, or invent phrases like id and superego, then it sounds like you have this very rigorous framework in place. And yeah, his like if Freud was a critic of religion, I wonder if his translators told him, like, maybe soul means this in German, but in English, if you use soul, people will associate this with religion. And then Freud decided, okay, well, let's use a different phrase then, because you didn't want to give the English reader this idea that it was like a religious branch of knowledge.
His views were weird on a lot of things. He very publicly bashed religion, but he was also weirdly open to the idea of ESP and wrote a couple of essays about how ESP might be real. I think he's a odd duck in some of this stuff. And
Wait, okay, let's define ESP for some of our audience who might not know what that means specifically. I actually associate ESP with like reading young adult novels when I was like a little girl and then a young teenager. It was a huge theme, at least in the 80s, for like young adult fiction. Everyone had ESP, and there'd be like groups of girls. It was kind of like the proto witch thing. Maybe there's like groups of girls at a boarding school, and one of them had ESP. So what does that? I mean, it means extrasensory perception, right? But how does it show? How does it present itself?
I think I'm trying to think, because I think he wrote 2 articles about it. And one of them was about how it emerges in the countertransference.
And explain what that is.
We have the whole thing talking about it, but basically it's when a therapist is with a patient in session, they're going to almost have a psychic-like connections with them where they'll get insights and awareness about what they're thinking or feeling or their past experience that aren't rationally explainable, and that it's possible that this isn't just an inference based on nonverbal or verbal information, but it's actually some type of mind reading.
Okay, but wait a second. Let's define transference and then countertransference just really briefly.
I think we should table that. I can do it really quick.
Really fast. Like, no, transference to me, like as a layperson, is when you're like you project, like suddenly your therapist becomes your father, right? And you're projecting that, and then countertransference would be like if the therapist is then doing the same thing in some way back to the patient. Ish.
That's not bad. That's not bad. I think like with all these psychoanalytic terms, like, there's thousands of different takes on them.
Right.
And so people define it really widely differently. And so there would be some people who would say, the prototypical transference is you think your therapist is your father or your mother, and you treat them that way unconsciously and have an enactment with them around that or something. But I think more broadly, it would be, I'd say the central question is, if I'm from if I'm trying to understand what the transference towards me is as a therapist, I'm asking, who am I to this patient? Who am I to them? Am I a servant? Am I a teacher? Am I their boss? Am I, what am I exactly? And I'm thinking about what that might mean. And it could entail all of the thoughts, feelings, and fantasies that they have towards me. And that would be a much broader sense of what transference is. And countertransference could be my own projections onto the patient related to my own neuroses. Or it could be, and I think this is the way it's more generally talked about now, all of the thoughts and feelings and fantasies that I might have back towards the patient.
Okay. Noted. Onward.
Okay. And so the idea is that somehow I'm with this person. This type of thing does happen where you're in session and you start to feel things or think about things that don't make sense. Like, why I haven't thought about this. I haven't thought about baseball in 20 years. And now whenever they're ever in session, I'm wondering how the Yankees are doing. And, I like, what is that about or something? And you kind of want to brush that off. And then it turns out that they had this pivotal childhood experience at a Yankees game or something. I'm just
so this is the ESP component here. Okay.
Or that's something that Freud, I don't think he was like, I don't remember all the details so well, but it had to be ESP, but he was open to the idea that ESP is one of the factors at play in psychotherapy sessions. I mean, Jung was totally convinced that ESP was a huge phenomena, and he did studies on it and wrote a lot about it and was very confident in that. Freud was a lot more tentative, but open to it, which you might not expect because he hated religion.
Right.
Maybe this is an interesting kind of historical note, but so some of the listeners might be familiar with the replication crisis in modern academic psychology. About something like 40 to 50% of studies up until very recently, you could not reproduce the same results if you ran the experiment again. And this caused this huge crisis in psychology of experimental methods. And, how do we know what's true and what's not true in all of these studies? But there was one study in particular that precipitated this crisis, and it was on ESP. So in 2011, there was a psychologist, Daryl Bem, who got a paper published in the Journal of JPSP, Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, which is like one of the premier flagship journals in social and personality psychology. And in this paper, he ran 9 studies proving, in quotes, proving that ESP existed. And Daryl Bem himself did not believe ESP existed, but he wanted to make a point that the modern methodological tools that psychologists use are flawed. And that if there's this idea of p-hacking, where essentially you can collect a bunch of data and choose to selectively report the results of, okay, well, these participants had this result, these participants had that, and then you use different statistical techniques until you get a significant result. And he proved that, if I show, college undergrads 2 obscure pictures and I say, behind this curtain, which one contains a fish? And if you get it right more than 50% of the time, then this suggests that ESP must exist and that these college undergrads must have some telepathic powers or something. And so he just ran this a bunch of times until he could get it above 50% and then published these studies. And then the entire field was plunged into this crisis, and then a bunch of other studies.
Is he said on the record he doesn't believe these findings?
Yes, my understanding.
Yeah. Believed it. I thought he believed that he did. I thought that he believed in ESP, and he believed.
No, well, unless he recanted. But my understanding is that he did this on purpose, in order to shine a light on like p-hacking, selective reporting. Sometimes called like the file drawer problem, where I can run 10 different studies, 9 of them I don't get a significant result, but just by chance 1 in 10 studies would show statistical significance, so that's the one I'm going to report. And so my understanding was he did this on purpose, and intentionally got it into the best journal he could, which is like, one of the best journals, specifically to show the field like something's going wrong here because you're all using these methods too, and we need to have a kind of reality check. But I am I'm recalling this from memory, reading about this in a magazine article from like 2016. So it may be
I
maybe things have changed since then.
I think he genuinely believed in ESP. And I
I
think
gotta
that,
look this up now.
I think not only did he believe in it, but there are a lot of other researchers. What's her name? Lisa Miller at Columbia was doing a ton of ESP research, and there were some of these there was a famous lit review of like different ESP, like I think they did a meta analysis of different ESP findings, and it was like, there's a lot more psychologists who believe in ESP than you would think, and a lot more research on it than you would think. But I
Interesting.
think the other thing that's interesting to what we're talking about is I think Daryl Bem's methodology was exactly the same as one that Jung did in like the 30s or 40s or something. He used the same thing. It was like, I think the way he did it was there was a deck of cards, and it was like it had a circle, square, triangle, or star on the card. And you shuffle the
Okay.
deck and you tell them which one it is. And you just flip the card and you see how accurate they are. And you just keep doing that. And you would do it like for an hour. So you'd get 1,000 trials or whatever. And then, and people were right. Like, at least what was reported is people were right like 30% of the time. You'd expect them to be right 25% of the time. It's 35,
Right.
but it's like,
Small.
but it was so many trials that it actually was a decent effect size actually. And, but did you find out, Rob? Is he, did he,
I'm just looking at ChatGPT. I'm not. Yeah, I just wanted to see what would turn up,
yeah.
and it says, yeah, he has explicitly stated he believed precognition, a form of ESP, was likely real. Um, and he was quoted as saying he believed existing research strongly implied that precognition is real.
Okay,
So
just to be
that
clear,
is
who are we talking
fascinating.
about right
So
now?
this
Not
this is Daryl Bem, the guy I mentioned earlier who ran
yeah.
those studies from
Okay.
2011. Um, wow. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I wonder if he ever sort of changed his mind on this point. Because it's funny, like he published these studies, and if he believed it, that's interesting, and he got the paper published, that's great. But then the effect of the paper probably had the exact opposite
Yeah.
of the intended effect, which is that he published the papers to show that ESP is real, but instead what happened is the entire field was like, oh, ESP is definitely not real, so something's wrong with what we're doing. um, so yeah, that is fascinating. So you're going from Freud to the modern day, but we're so dead set against the possibility of ESP that if someone proves that it's real, then that means that it's the methods that are flawed, not the conclusion.
Mhm. Well, getting back to Freud and Bettelheim here, do you guys think that Freud's sort of outsized influence on the field is a net positive or a net negative for the field?
For like psychology or,
Yeah.
I don't think he has very much of an influence outside of the clinical world.
Okay.
There are some concepts, like there is this idea of thinking fast and slow.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Kahneman.
yeah, and that idea of these two cognitive tracks was an idea of Freud's. He framed it primary and secondary process thought, which was a little bit different than how it's conceptualized now. But there are things. I think the importance of the unconscious is definitely something that's a consensus in psychology now that Freud had a big hand in promoting. In the clinical world, it's like, I mean, he basically invented talk therapy. Almost all the forms of psychotherapy have their roots in psychoanalysis, including cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy and family systems therapy and emotion focus. They all trace their roots back to an outgrowth of psychoanalysis or a principle from psychoanalysis. So it's been huge in mental health. But like you're kind of, I guess like the question is, has that been have the costs of the bad ideas been more than the benefits of the good ideas? Or
Yeah, and just I mean, he's such a household name for the wrong reasons, probably. I mean, he's is a punchline. Like a cigar is just a cigar. Like everybody kind of, there are these tropes floating around that are associated with Freud, probably have very little to do with his actual practice and ideas.
And I think that, I think that the people who end up liking Freud or liking psychoanalysis have had an experience with it, because you when you have it, especially if you ever do psychoanalysis, and I was in psychoanalysis, and or that type of therapy, and you recognize, you have the experience of recognizing a process that's unconsciously driven, that things shift or open up for you through that. It can be such a life-changing experience. And you kind of see a benefit of thinking about the unconscious. It's, for example, like, yeah, a lot of people in therapy are like, well, I feel this, but it doesn't even make any sense why I would feel it. It's just like so first session of every treatment. And it's like, well, maybe, even though, like, let's say your daughter gets cancer and you feel guilty for not having protected her from getting the cancer on an unconscious level. It's like the idea that obviously it's not your fault that she got cancer, but you have internalized that it is your fault, and feel depressed about it, or you're irritable about it, and you're like, why am I feeling this way? Why, and it's like, well, there's this unconscious fantasy that doesn't make sense, that's driving what you're experiencing emotionally. And when people can recognize that in themselves, and it shifts them to process their feelings differently, it's so powerful. And that's what really got me. And I think it's well beyond what's mentioned in Bettelheim, but that type of thing, that there's these parts of myself that I'm not aware of that are having this influence on me. And when you can recognize them and things shift, it's so powerful.
In that example you gave, Andrew, is that so if your daughter gets cancer and you blame yourself, what's behind that? Would that be something like this unconscious desire for omnipotent control, that if it's my fault, then that means that the world is comprehensible in some way, but if it just happened, then that means the world is so chaotic and unpredictable, and there's like a terrifying feeling associated with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, it would be like, I might put it in more emotional terms, that it's like a defense against feeling powerless or not in control, that the feeling that you don't have control over something so important is a very can be unnerving. And so you kind of defend against it with this unconscious fantasy that isn't true. And your conscious mind can be like, well, I know that's true, I don't need to think about that. But it's still kind of operating, and you still feel the guilt. And to just recognize that I can have an unconscious fantasy that doesn't make any sense, that's having a huge impact on my mood and my life. I mean, and I think when you hear those, when you actually see it in process, you're like, this stuff really does happen a lot. And especially if you're working as a therapist, which I think is why so many therapists end up gravitating to this stuff, at least in part.
Yeah, to your question, Megan, I guess initially I would have said, probably years ago when I first started studying psychology, it was, it's better to be forgotten, just kind of sweep that under the rug. Those were the early days. A lot of mistakes were made. But then later, when I read about other accounts of Freud and how so much attention is paid to his mistakes rather than his achievements, and we don't do this with other other great thinkers. Isaac Newton was famous. He famously believed in alchemy. He tried to turn his own urine into gold, and he believed in biblical prophecies.
Bars,
yeah, he thought he could, like, what is it? Whatever the methods of alchemy, which was kind of the precursor to modern chemistry. He thought he could do something, mix it with certain materials or
It's
something.
the
Yeah.
other prequel to Breaking Bad. It goes way back.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, he did weird things like that. He believed in biblical prophecies, so he would pore over the pages of the Bible and try to determine when things would happen, based on scripture, prophecies, whatever. And yet he was also the guy who invented calculus and Newtonian physics, and could tell you when the planets and stars would align and that kind of thing. And so he was very clearly a bright person who also had some kooky ideas, which I think could also describe Freud, brilliant guy with some kooky ideas, but we only remember the kooky, maybe because they were so crazy, uh, and judging him by the standards of his time. But overall, I think probably good. Freud, I think like the benefits of talk therapy. I mean, he helped to pioneer that and popularize that, which a lot of people have benefited from, and the importance of early childhood experiences in shaping personality and human development. And I was I highlighted something here which I find interesting. So this is something that I think maybe falls under the the Geisteswissenschaft, this kind of humanistic approach. But Bettelheim writes here, he's talking about Freud's essay, The Theme of the Three Caskets, analyzing the unconscious motives, frequently evoked image of this fateful choice among three. And so Freud talks about how there are three caskets in Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. There are three daughters in King Lear, three goddesses in the Judgment of Paris. And then he talks about how this is like a symbolic expression of the three fateful roles that the female plays in the life of a male, as mother, as beloved, and finally as the symbolic mother, Mother Earth, to whom man returns when he dies. And I think like you would never see like something like that by a modern. You wouldn't read this in like Thinking Fast and Slow. You would
edit it out.
But I think it's such a lovely and interesting and intriguing way of thinking about the richness of human life. And is it true? Is it false? I don't even know how you would even demonstrate that something like this is true or not through the scientific method. But something about it does ring true. But then, as I'm reading this and I find it interesting, I could also imagine, like, haven't a lot of Freud's critics objected to his ideas out of accusations of sexism, right? So he's talking about, the three women in a man's life, and that's why this is important. But he ignores the sort of the female side of human experience.
Totally.
Right. I mean, he also talks about the Oedipus complex, right? And it's not about wanting to sleep with your mother.
Mm.
Newsflash. I mean, I think that was one of the things too that he said in the translation to English, like the nuances of this had been lost, and it kind of just turned into this again like a punchline. And that the Oedipus complex is really much more about interpersonal conflict and aggression and rivalry and just kind of like what we have to reckon with in relationships.
So
yeah.
Go ahead, Ruff.
No, I was just going to say, like, that was actually a fascinating section of the first half of the book. Was, like everyone else, when you first hear about the Oedipus complex, you think this is insanity, and then he explains it, and it helps. I mean, I don't fully buy it still, but it makes a little bit more sense to me now. Specifically the feelings around, I guess, guilt of the child, that he's the claim wasn't that he wants to kill his father and marry his mother, the child. It's more so like he has these feelings of aggression toward the father, these maybe quasi-romantic feelings towards the mother, and then the Oedipus complex is the guilt that comes with those feelings, and that this can express itself in sort of weird symptoms or whatever. And that actually kind of makes sense, because we all have those feelings of unconscious aggression, or we feel like we don't like someone even if we can't understand why, and then that makes us feel maybe bad about ourselves, or we try to understand that. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I do think it is worth Bettelheim's. I think Bettelheim is a beautiful description of the Oedipus complex that I really like. It is, I think, a bit of a revision from what Freud said, which was kind of more focused on infantile sexuality and did include more claims that we probably wouldn't, about like if you get, you can get fixated on the anal phase of psychosexual development at age 2, and then that'll lead to a certain personality structure or thing. I mean, there was a lot of stuff like that, but Bettelheim has, I think, the most beautiful and resonant framing of the best reading of the Oedipus complex. And there's a really great family therapist who was a psychoanalyst named Salvador Minuchin, and he wrote a very famous case about an Oedipal family. And what happened was the father, basically, I think there was like two parents, a mother and a father, and then a son who was living at home into his 30s, and actually had a couple of hospitalizations. Incidentally, tried to blind himself at one point, like Oedipus does in the story. But essentially the framing was the father had felt unwanted. The parents weren't having sex. The father withdrew from the family and would drink. And the mother had no support and kind of overattached to the son. And the son, by becoming depressed and self-sabotaging, was actually keeping himself home so that his mother would be okay, because on some level he knew that he was her only support. And so the family therapy intervention was really to kind of get the parents having sex again and having more of a marital relationship, so that the pressure was off the son and the son would feel free to grow up. And
Wait,
all
when was this? Is a true family? This is not a hypothetical. This is a true.
This was a case study. I'm sure some details were changed in the write-up, but it's a case study. Yeah, a famous.
And do you know what era it was? Do you know when this was roughly?
I want to say 80s. Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say this is like the failure to launch. This is a new way of looking into this very contemporary phenomenon that people can't stop talking about.
It was the mother replacing the husband with the son emotionally, which kind of the son, but if the son grew up, he would break his mom's heart because she'd feel abandoned and have no one. And so you needed to get the parents together to free up the son so that he could actually mature. And all the themes of the son's anger at both parents and guilt about it were so active in the depression and the symptoms that but the family was framing it as, what's wrong with the son? When it's really this larger constellation of this family drama of the different roles and aggression and needs and guilt that we're discussing. So that's a good explanation of like maybe a more Bettelheimian picture of how the Oedipus complex could manifest.
Yeah, that's helpful, and it reminds me of this passage here in Freud and Man's Soul. Bettelheim talks about the Oedipus complex, and that Oedipus acted as he did because his parents rejected him as an infant, and that a child who was not rejected by both his parents would never act as Oedipus did. So when his original parents left him abandoned, that set in motion the story of Sophocles in the play. And if they had never done that, then he would have never returned to kill them. And so I guess, in some ways, maybe this is very Freudian. Blame the parents. It's not that the child spontaneously wants to marry his mom and kill his father. It's it starts with the parents, and then whatever that inculcates in the child, that's what sets the Oedipus complex in motion.
Yeah, and I mean, did you want to say something? No, and I think there's something about like how the father like needs to have a positive like it's like one of the values of having a positive relationship with a son and the father is that they won't want to kill each other. And one of the reasons like to foster independence and like help a child mature, especially like a young man, is how important it is to not have the parents' needs be imposed on the son. I think there's a lot of pitfalls that families fall into that intersect with this story one way or another.
Hmm.
But it's not
Yeah,
like the son is in the case study, and I think the way Mnuchin would frame it just is it's not that it's the parents' fault. It's that it's the whole family unit in a way kind of conspiring together to enact this thing. It's not the. I think it's you frame it a little bit differently.
hmm. Is it difficult to treat individual patients then if they're embedded in such a toxic like family environment? There's only so much you can do with an individual, right? If it's they're having difficulty with toxic parents and spouse and broader sort of social community or whatever that does that sort of limit the effectiveness of therapy?
I mean, that's the whole family systems, family therapist approach is like, yes. And that's why if you tried to, as this patient did a lot of individual treatment, this son did, but it wasn't until the family issues were addressed that they could actually get out of it. And the people hate family therapy. They don't want to do it.
Really? Oh.
Because it's not for any one of you. It's like when you're in individual therapy, it's like, great, I get to see my therapist, I'll vent, I'll maybe get supported, I'll get some help with my things. When you're in family session, it's like you're going to get called out by your family members and have it be like it's people hate it.
Unless they're winning the therapy, right? I mean, is there a sense that, like, I mean, with couples therapy, I mean, in my experience with that was kind of became a joke, like, oh, who won therapy today? Like, you won this one, and then I won last week. So yeah.
But I think it's like, but in reality, if it's a kid, or I would say if it's a failure to launch thing, you do want to have some sessions with the parents. You do want to have buy-in. I knew child therapists who would be like, I meet with the kid every week and I meet with the parents every week. And I actually did some treatments like that. It's nice. You get a whole different perspective on things. You see other issues that are playing out that you can address. But most parents don't want to do that either. You'll be lucky to get them once a month. But the young kids, you can do once a month. But when they're older, sometimes they don't even want to do the once a month.
I feel like the parents are eager to do it because the parents want to make their case and they want to know what they're trying to get information out of the therapist. What do the kids say, or this sort of thing? I mean, I guess that's its own thing.
Some of them do and some of them don't. The ones that do, I mean, how many times? I mean, the thing that I hated about seeing kids, I did it for a while, is that you'd get triangulated by the parents. The parents would push you to do things with the kid that were going to destroy the treatment, and they'd give you lots of pressure to get results really quickly, whereas it doesn't really work with kids. It takes a couple months for them to be comfortable with you. And like, nobody wants to hear like it's going to be like a few months before we really get started on things. It's just like and then it's slow, and and so I hated being triangulated with and it's like, who's the client really? Because in a lot of ways the parent they're paying, they're making the demands, they decide if it continues or not. But you want to have a good relationship with the kid. I found that to be that was my least. I liked seeing the kids. I thought the triangulation with the parents was so hard.
So I had to go into child therapy when I was a kid. So I was adopted, and shortly after being adopted out of foster homes, my adoptive parents divorced, and then I was I don't know if it was a requirement or if it was my social worker and my adoptive mother decided I should go into therapy. But I remember being very suspicious of my child therapist because I think in a child's mind, you think like all of the adults are conspiring with each other. Your teacher, of course, your teacher is going to rat you out to your parents. Your parents communicate with the neighbors. All of the adults talk to each other. and so you can't trust any of them. If you break a rule in front of one adult, they're going to tell all the other adults. And so I remember like not trusting my therapist. Like she would tell me for, a couple of months, like, oh, whatever we talk about in here stays in here. Like, I'll talk to your mom, about other things, but not about what we talk about here. And I think, yeah, it probably took at least a month, if not 2 months, for me to finally just start talking and then waiting to see, is this going to get back to my mom? And then it wouldn't. And then I started to be more open about it. So yeah, I could imagine that being extremely difficult, and the parents probably have to take time out of work, and it's, you want the fast results. That makes sense.
And they wouldn't get psycho. Maybe another week we can talk about what the psychoanalytic play therapy for kids looks like, because it's sometimes incredibly rich. But I often found that the parents didn't always get it. They kind of wanted you to whip their kid into shape or something. I don't know if that's a generalization, but it's kind of like get them, acting the right way. Obviously, this is not all the time by any means, but like they want things fixed, and then it's like you'd have this super rich experiences with the kid, and the parents were like, we don't care about that. I don't know.
Well, we have to wrap up. But in terms of Freud and Man's Soul by Bruno Bettelheim, what would you say is the most important reason somebody should read this book? Why would you recommend this book to any given person?
I think that it makes Freud's ideas a lot more relatable. And I think it makes them more accessible, and you can kind of feel the emotion and the power behind some of the best of his ideas. So for people who struggle with him, it's a great way to kind of open up what's useful and insightful in his work.
Well said, Rob.
So again, I'm only about halfway through, and I hope we can get to this maybe in a future discussion. But the part that I found most interesting, besides it being extremely readable, is Bettelheim talks about how people have misinterpreted Freud as just advocating an unrestrained letting go of, well, if the problem is repression, then you should just talk about anything that comes to mind. If, sexual repression has created all these symptoms, then you should just let your freak flag fly and, just completely behave in this uninhibited way. But actually, the way that Bettelheim describes it, it's actually what Freud said was, you can allow yourself to be uninhibited in these controlled situations with a trained therapist for a set time each day. But Freud never advocated a complete destruction of any repressive impulses, of just doing whatever you please. And that's kind of what I like, the kind of popular opinion that I absorbed about Freud is, it's all about repression, and he says you should stop repressing and just do whatever you want. And so, yeah, I would like to talk more about that and hear what you guys think about this idea of, the popular effect of Freud versus what he actually said about inhibition and repression and, all of this stuff. But so far, I've really been enjoying it.
Huge.
Likewise. Thank you for introducing me to it. Great.
Yeah.
Well, this concludes our episode. I'm afraid our time is up. The appropriate way to wrap this up.
Yeah.
This podcast should really only be 50 minutes, technically, right?
A 50-minute hour.
50-minute hour.
It's 45 these days.
Oh, wow. Inflation.
Yeah, really.
Oh, sorry.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, our time, we have exceeded the time. We're going to send a supplemental bill to our audience. Well, thank you both so much, and we'll see you next week.